The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 14th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ. I have before me a Christian comic strip here. It's got two sheep, and the sillier of the two sheep has an inner tube around his waist. He's got a snorkel, he's got some scuba goggles on, and he says to the other, Peter wouldn't have had a problem if he'd had the right equipment. And the other sheep says, "Ted, this isn't about swimming. The ancients believed that the demons lived in the deep. Peter doubts that Jesus is master even of them." To which the sheep with all the scuba gear says, "Oh, okay, I'm okay then. I never go into the deep end." Well, that's not exactly a gut buster, but it's cute. And it actually makes a good point. There's a lot to unpack. This story of Jesus and Peter walking on the water, even on a surface level, no pun intended. And there's even more if you dive deeper into it. Okay, I'll stop now. And explore some of the background that you might not know unless you know. You see, in ancient Jewish thought, the sea represented chaos, evil, confusion, and everything threatening. If you think about it, you don't really think about the ancient Israelites having a reputation for seafaring, do you? Even Paul, when he sailed on his missionary journeys, usually did so in league with Gentile sailors. Yes, we have lots of stories in the gospel about fishing expeditions, but those took place on the Sea of Galilee. And the Sea of Galilee, in spite of its name, was actually more like a big lake, only a fraction of the size of, say, Lake St. Clair. That's about as adventurous as ancient Jews got in terms of seafaring. It was more like lake faring. So, almost anywhere in the entire Bible, either testament, when the sea is mentioned, it's usually in relation to chaos, destruction, evil, anything that threatens. The sea is bad in the ancient Israelite mindset. And there's probably a lot of allegory in Matthew's mind as he tells this story. The church, as you might know, is sometimes symbolized as a boat or a ship. And that symbolism is likely not lost on Matthew, even back in the early days of Christianity. And the waves are rough. The boat is being buffeted by them. And significantly, this is the first time in Matthew's gospel that Jesus has left the 12 on their own recognizance without him. This story itself is reminiscent of the story of Jesus stilling the storm on the boat earlier in Matthew's gospel in chapter 8, But at least that time, Jesus was there with the disciples in the boat. This time, the disciples are left all on their own to brave the elements. They are without Jesus. Yet, they're not without him. At just the right time, Jesus appears to them, walking on the water. And we see that the disciples, rather than taking comfort in his presence, are terrified, mistaking him for a ghost. Now, we're probably, many of us, familiar with the exchange between Jesus and Peter, but let's look at it a little more closely, shall we? First, Jesus gives them the assurance, "Take heart, it is I." Now remember, this is how God most properly identifies God's self, with the name I am. Jesus isn't just confirming his identity to the disciples. Likely this is Matthew's telling, a rhetorical device to lift up Jesus' divinity. It is I am. I am the God who created the sea and who has authority over the elements. And Peter says, "Lord, if it is you, where have we heard similar words before? The wilderness temptations. And who said them? The devil. If you are the Son of God, prove it." Whether that's by turning stones into bread, falling off the top of the temple, or helping me to walk on water. And while it's commonly assumed that Jesus chides Peter for his lack of faith because he wasn't able to maintain his sea legs on the water, another pun, sorry, a case could be made that Peter's lack of faith lie in the fact that he demanded proof to begin with. In another place, Jesus even calls Peter Satan, right? And tells him to get behind him. And in that sense, Satan does not so much mean the source of evil, but the skepticism about whether Jesus knows what he's doing. The issue might not have been so much that Peter started to sink, but that Peter even felt the need to get out of the boat in the first place. After all, wasn't that where the lack of faith really began? Who of us hasn't felt ourselves starting to sink in life many times over? Who of us doesn't know what it is to not have enough faith to even trust God with our daily lives? And you'll note, Jesus didn't tell Peter to get out of the boat. Peter insisted. Peter demanded proof. And yet, Jesus honored the request. That doesn't mean he thought it was a good idea, but he honored Peter's prayer just the same. Just like the post-resurrection Jesus honored Thomas's need for proof of his resurrection, even though he said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and believe." There may be times when we are called on to do something daring and need all the faith God will give us to do it. But God will call those shots. Most of the time, God calls on us to exercise our faith just by trusting God to know what God is doing. So unlike the earlier storm at sea, this time Jesus wasn't with the disciples to begin with. Jesus is taking the training wheels of faith off. It's time to see if they can keep faith in him, even when he's not napping right there in their midst. And even though Jesus isn't with them, yet he is. He appears at just the right moment. And in their panic and in their despair, they aren't at first able to recognize him. And even when they do, they're not able to trust him. We wonder why things aren't going just so. We bargain with God, or we put God to the test. But there are times when God sees fit to take the training wheels off. We might panic without the support that God gave us up to this point that we took for granted. And God says it's time to grow those faith muscles. It's a paradox, but there are those times when we learn to trust God's presence more, precisely because we feel God's absence, but not really God's absence, because God is never really absent. But sometimes God might let us experience what we think of as God's absence, just enough so that we don't assume that we know just how God is supposed to work. God is always present with us. In our own lives as we struggle with health issues, financial issues, marriage and family relationships, and whatever else. In the life of the world, as we struggle with hunger, stewardship of the earth, war, terrorism, political polarization, and all the other things. In the life of the church, as we strain to see Jesus walking on the water to us, where our little boat feels buffeted and battered. But remember, Jesus does come walking on the water. And when God seems absent, it is then that God is perhaps most present. Amen.
Amen.